There's a thing nobody tells you about standing guard outside St. James's Palace. Not the cold. Not the weight of the bearskin after hour 2. Not even the particular torture of a nose that itches while your hands are required to stay exactly where they are, at your sides, still as carved oak. Nobody tells you about the smell. My name is Corporal Elliot Marsh, and I've been standing in front of palaces long enough to have developed what my grandmother, God rest her, she would have found all of this deeply funny, would have called a gift for nonsense. What I have is not nonsense. What I have is a nose. It started my 3rd week on rotation. October. The kind of October London does when it's trying to remind you it invented gray. The tourists hadn't fully thinned yet. They never fully thin. Not really, not the way you hope. And the morning shift had that particular quality of damp wool and stranger's coffee and the diesel breath of a number 11 bus idling too long at the corner. I was standing my post at the inner gate, knew enough that I was still performing the stillness rather than inhabiting it. There's a difference. Veterans of this post, and there are men who've stood it 20 years and we're like a second skeleton. They don't look still. They're still the way a river stone is still. It doesn't try. It simply cannot be moved. I was trying. My eyes were fixed on the middle distance the way we're trained. You see everything and you look at nothing. It sounds like a riddle, and it is, except the answer is muscle memory and about 18 months of practice. The morning smelled like London, which is to say it smelled like 15 things arguing with each other. Fumes. Coffee. The cut flower stall on the corner that opens at 6:30 and perfumes the whole block with lilies that are slightly too ripe. Exhaust. Someone's cinnamon pastry. Rain on stone, which has its own particular grammar, a smell that's less a smell, and more a pressure change you feel behind the eyes. I was cataloging all of it without meaning to. Just something my brain started doing in those early weeks, categorizing, sorting, filing. My sergeant had told me the first day, your brain needs something to do, Marsh, or it'll eat itself. Give a job. I gave the smells. The first time I caught it, I thought I'd imagined it. A warmth. That's the only word, and it's insufficient, but it's where every attempt at description has to start. A warmth inside the cold. Something that moved through the ordinary layered smell of that October morning the way a cello note moves through ambient noise. Lower than everything else, deeper, carrying further. Sandalwood was in it, and something underneath sandalwood. Something that sandalwood was the polite word for, the way you describe a cathedral by saying there's a building there. It lasted 4 seconds. I didn't turn my head. You don't turn your head. But my whole body, the back of my neck, the ridge of my jaw, some stupid ancient mammal thing I can't name, went very quiet and very alert at the same time. A black car had passed. That was all. A car had passed behind me, and to the left, moving at the unhurried pace of something that has never once needed to rush, and whatever was inside that car had left behind it this trace, this thread of warm cedar, and something older, and I had nearly vibrated out of my bearskin like a plucked string. Corporal Davies was on the inner post that day. We were allowed a brief exchange at the half-hour check. Did you catch that? I said it without moving my face. You learn to speak from the back of your throat, barely. He looked at me from the corner of his eye. The car. The smell. Long pause. Yeah, he said. You'll learn it. That was all. He said it the way you say something about weather. Inevitable. Unremarkable. Already known. It took me 3 months to learn it properly. Davies wouldn't teach me directly. This was not cruelty. This was protocol of a very informal kind. The understanding was that certain things are learned through repetition and cannot be shortened. If I asked too directly, he'd just look at me with that brick wall patience of his and say, pay attention, and turn back to the middle distance. So I paid attention. The cars come and go from St. James's in a pattern that is not random, but is not precisely predictable either, and there are grades to everything, layers. A government minister's car smells of leather and ambition and always, always the ghost of whatever their assistant had for breakfast. Briefing papers have a smell, if you get close enough. That slightly burnt smell of a photocopier running hot. Dignitaries from abroad arrive with their home climate still on them. I learned to identify these without meaning to, a particular dry warmth from the Gulf states delegations, something jasmine edge that preceded certain European visitors, a crisp green scent that seemed to accompany Scandinavian arrivals the way their vowels do. I was building something in my head. A library. No one asked me to. I just was. But none of it was the smell. The one from October. That one I caught 3 more times over the winter, always briefly, always from the left gate at a distance. Always associated with a black car of a particular trim level and window tint that I began to recognize the way you recognize the specific posture of a person you know. Each time it was the same. Warm. Cedar adjacent. Under the cedar, something I kept running out of words for. Something that smelled the way pressed velvet looks, the way old wood sounds in a house that has been continuously inhabited for centuries, something that carried no urgency because it had never needed any. January. A morning so cold it had crystallized everything. The railings lacquered in frost. Tourists looking genuinely betrayed by the weather, as if London had personally deceived them. Sergeant Holloway came by on inspection and stopped at my post. He didn't make this stop for everyone. I'd been here long enough by then to know it meant something, though I wasn't sure what. He stood beside me for nearly 90 seconds without speaking. This is a Sergeant Holloway thing. He speaks on his own schedule and nowhere else. "You've been cataloging," he said finally. "Sir." Davies mentioned it. I said nothing. It hadn't been a question. "There's a thing about this post," Holloway said, still looking straight ahead, "that most people don't pick up for a year. Some don't at all. Sir, you smell them before you see them. The real ones." I let that sit for a moment. The real ones. "Royalty," he said. And then, very evenly, "It's not magic. Don't be soft about it. It's conditioning. It's what happens when your whole life, generations of it, is spent in rooms that are built to smell a particular way, dressed in fabrics preserved a particular way, surrounded by people whose entire professional purpose is the maintenance of a specific sensory atmosphere. It gets into the clothes. It gets into the skin." He paused. "It gets into the air," he said, about 40 feet ahead of them. I turned this over carefully. "So, it's recognizable. Once you know it." I know," he said. Davies told me. Another pause, this one shorter. "Don't get religious about it, Marsh." He turned to go. "It's a skill. Same as any other. Only this one you can't train out of a manual." The day it became real was February. Not a state visit. Not a formal occasion of any kind. Those have their own choreography, and you know them coming a week ahead. This was routine, or what passes for routine in a place where routine wears a very specific kind of weight. The morning had been ordinary in the way February mornings at St. James's are ordinary, which is to say heavy and flat and smelling of wet stone and the ghost of exhaust. I was 40 minutes into my shift. My body had found its equilibrium. My mind was doing its filing. I caught it without deciding to. Not the hint of it this time. The whole thing, fully present. The way a sound is different when you're in the same room as the source. The warmth first, that instant unfolding of cedar and something under cedar, and then the secondary layer I'd been trying to name for 4 months. Beeswax. That was the undertone I'd been missing. Not candle wax. Old beeswax, the kind worked in old wood and old fabric over enough years that it becomes part of the object rather than a coating on it. It smelled of inheritance, of things persisted with rather than replaced. I did not turn my head. My hand stayed at my sides. But every single nerve I had went perfectly, completely still. The real stillness this time, not performed, not practiced, just the body recognizing something that the mind hadn't formally filed yet. The car came into my peripheral vision 9 seconds later. Standard black. Standard tint. Standard unuried pace. The rear door opened, and a figure stepped out, and without thinking, without processing any visual detail at all before my eyes had resolved anything sharper than a shape and a color, I knew. I knew in my chest, the way you know your own front door in the dark. The figure walked past. I on my post. 20 minutes later, Holloway came back. He didn't say anything for almost 2 full minutes. Then, we didn't move. "No, sir. Even before you saw." "Yes, sir." He stood there another moment. Not quite pleased. Holloway was not a man who did pleased, but satisfied in the way a well-set bone satisfies a surgeon. Right, he said, and walked away. That was the beginning. What came after, that's what I want to tell you about. Because knowing a thing and living a thing are different weights. And I had barely picked up the first one when the second came at me from a direction I hadn't thought to watch. The thing about a skill that nobody officially validates is that you spend a long time wondering if you've invented it. I spent March doing that. Holloway had said it once, and not repeated himself, that being the Holloway method, and Davies, when I tested the subject, gave me his standard look of "why are you asking me things I already told you," and moved on. The other men on rotation were professional in that particular British military way that treats most human experiences as something to be endured without commentary. So I went quiet about it, kept it to myself, filed it, kept smelling. Here's what the tourists don't know about the guards at St. James's. They think we're props. I don't mean that harshly. I understand what we look like from the outside. The bearskin, the tunic, the practiced immobility. We have been photographed more than any other human beings in continuous active service. And in approximately 93% of those photographs, some person is making a face beside us while we stare forward and pretend they're furniture. The tourists think the pretending goes one way. It doesn't. We see everything. We hear, Christ, we hear everything. And after enough months, we smell everything too, and we build from all of that a picture of what's happening around us that would embarrass a detective. What people say in front of us, for instance. Their theory, the tourists, is that we can't hear, or that we don't process. As if the bearskin works like a sound baffle. A man once stood 4 feet from me and told his wife, in what he clearly believed was confidence, that he'd been having an affair with her sister for 3 years. He told her this in front of me the way people confess things in front of dogs and infants. I stared at the middle distance. I heard every word. That is the other education this post gives you, the one that runs alongside the smell cataloging. You learn that the invisible, the unacknowledged, the overlooked, sees more than the visible. Royalty has known this for 1,000 years. We've known it for as long as we've stood here. April arrived the way London April does, with occasional warmth and the constant threat of taking it back. The incident I need to tell you about happened on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because there's a flower market that runs on Tuesdays near the back entrance of St. James's, and the smell of it comes over the wall in a specific way. Almost overwhelming, the way fresh-cut stems smell when the cold keeps them from fully opening. A cold flower smell, green and tight and not quite ready. That smell is relevant. Remember it. I was on the outer post that day, which is the one that faces the public, the one where the tourists queue up with their phones. My particular gift for nonsense was fully operational. I had cataloged in the first 35 minutes of my shift the following 2 different brands of American sunscreen, indistinguishable from each other to most people, but I had developed opinions. The dried salt on a man who had clearly run to get here and not showered adequately. A very good French perfume on a woman who had deployed it with the confidence of someone who bought it for themselves, and the particular warm, electrical smell of about 40 phone cameras operating in a small space. The crowd was medium density. A school group from somewhere, Dutch, I thought, based on the particular flat cadence of the teachers calling instructions. A cluster of American retirees in matching waterproof jackets. The usual churn of individual visitors cycling through their 3 minutes of photo taking and moving on. I was doing my job, which is to say, I was seeing everything and looking at nothing. The first thing that told me something was different was not a smell. It was a silence. Crowds have a texture of noise. They're not loud or quiet. They're textured. Individual voices, footsteps, the scrape of shoe leather on pavement, the compressed audio of videos playing on held phones. When you stand in a crowd enough, you feel the texture of it the way a ship's captain feels the texture of water. Not consciously, but with a body that has learned to read what changes. The texture changed. Not suddenly. Not in the way an alarm changes things. More like a slow exhale. Like a room of people all deciding at the same moment, without consulting each other, to take one step back. A A widening. I filed it. Then the smell hit me. Not the warm one. Not the cedar beeswax inheritance smell that I had learned and cataloged and associated with black cars and a particular kind of unhurried authority. This was different. This one came from the crowd itself, from inside it, and it was the smell of disruption. The particular high-sharp smell of a crowd of bodies that has just received information it doesn't know how to process. Adrenaline from enough people in close proximity produces a smell that is less dramatic than you'd expect. Not blood, not fear exactly, more like the smell of a fuse. A before smell, an about to smell. My body registered it before my eyes found the source. Then my eyes found the source. She was standing approximately 12 feet from my post, near the front edge of the crowd. 60 perhaps. Gray coat, sensible shoes, the particular posture of someone for whom sensible shoes are a philosophy rather than a concession. She was holding a camera, one of the older, larger ones, not a phone, with both hands, but her hands had stopped doing anything purposeful. She was staring at something to her left, at an angle I couldn't quite read from my position. And she was very, very still in the wrong way. There's a right way to be still. I know it professionally. The right way to be still is when the body has decided that stillness is the correct active choice, when every system has agreed and settled. The wrong way is when the body has been interrupted, when it was moving and then something stopped it and it's waiting for permission to start again, and the permission hasn't come. She was wrong still, and the people immediately around her had picked it up. That social contagion of a person stopped in an unexpected way, and the widening I'd felt in the crowd's texture had its origin point. 12 feet. My post was 12 feet away. I did not move. This is the hardest thing I have ever had to explain to people who haven't done this job, and I'm going to try to explain it here because it matters for what comes next. Not moving is not passivity. Not moving is not indifference. Not moving from this post is a specific active commitment that you renew every second you maintain it. The tourists, the people standing there watching, they wanted me to move. I could feel it from them the way you feel a collective lean. The pull of a crowd that wants the prop to become a person. I didn't move. What I did instead was the other thing, the thing that runs in parallel. I extended everything else. The smell, the sound, the peripheral vision. I built a picture from non-movement. The woman had been stopped by a man. I gathered this in pieces, the way you gather pieces in the dark, by what they're not rather than what they are. The shape in her left peripheral had the dimensions and movement quality of male, mid-40s, slightly too close for the social distance a stranger earns in public. The woman had not chosen to stop. The woman had been stopped. The crowd was doing what crowds do, which is a mixture of watching and pretending not to and filming and pretending not to film. The Dutch school group had noticed. One of the teachers, young woman, anxious energy, she'd been managing the group with the exhausted competence of someone doing this job for the love of it and very little else, was watching with her chin slightly raised, the way people do when they're deciding whether something is their business. It is always someone else's business first. Then it becomes everyone's. What I smelled in that 12-foot gap between my post and the woman in the gray coat was not royalty. I want to be specific about that because the whole point of what I'm trying to tell you is the contrast. What I smelled was the before smell again, the fuse smell, and underneath it the particular sour note of alcohol from a body that had processed it overnight and was still carrying it, not drunk, not now, but the residue of it. And cologne deployed in the way cologne sometimes is in excess as if covering something. The man had the smell of a decision already made. That is the only way I can put it. Some smells are present tense. Some smells are past tense. This one was future tense. It had already decided. I had been standing at this post for 9 months by then, and I had never once broken position. What happened next I've been asked to describe many times, and every time I describe it, I'm aware that it sounds either more dramatic or less dramatic than it actually was, depending on what the person asking wants it to be. Here is what it was. It was a weight shift. That's all. I moved my weight from center to slightly left, which is such a small thing that probably 3 people in that crowd noticed it, and the other 40 didn't. But from a person who has stood 2-hour shifts in fixed position, A weight shift carries a specific signal that the people trained to read it, and there are always such people nearby. You're never alone on this post, even when you appear to be, will respond to. I felt Davies read it. He was on the inner post, behind me, and to the right. I felt his attention change the way you feel a shift in current. 12 feet. The woman. The man. The decision smell. 3 seconds. Then a hand landed on my left shoulder, firm and brief as a key in a lock, and I knew without turning that it was Holloway. Marsh. That was all he said, and I understood the full sentence, which was, I see it. Stand down. It's handled. What happened to the man in the next 45 seconds? I watched from the corner of my eye. 2 men in plain clothes, who had been standing in the crowd in the way trees stand in a forest, present, unremarkable, structural, materialized at the man's left and right with the casual authority of people for whom this is Tuesday. Technically Tuesday. The man was not dramatic about leaving. That surprised me slightly, though I suppose it shouldn't have. People who are removed by professionals in that particular quiet way rarely make scenes. The professionalism of the removal is itself a kind of deflation. He went. The woman in the gray coat stood for a moment where she'd been standing. Then she looked at the camera in her hands. Then she looked up at my post. I was staring at the middle distance, but I was watching her. She nodded. One single nod, the kind that carries full sentences. Thank you, I know I saw you, I know you couldn't move, and that's all right. Then she took her photograph. Of the gate. Not of me. I thought that was something. The choice of what to photograph after that. Holloway came back at the quarter-hour mark. How did you know? He asked. He smelled like tomorrow, I said, and then immediately felt foolish about it. Holloway did not make me feel foolish about it. He stood for a moment. That's one way to put it, he said. Keep the nose sharp, Marsh. He walked away. The April morning went back to its business. The flower market smell from over the wall, the tourist churn, the Dutch school group being herded toward the next landmark. The woman in the gray coat was gone. I stood my post, and I thought about the difference between 2 kinds of recognition. One is the warm, cedar and inheritance recognition, the one that tells you someone has been treated like royalty for so long that the royalty has become biochemical. The other is the cold, sharp, fused before it catches recognition, the one that tells you someone has made themselves into a different kind of authority, the kind that takes rather than carries. Both of them come to you before the eyes confirm it. Both of them are, in their way, about power. The difference is in the direction it moves. Summer at St. James's is a different creature entirely from the winter version. Winter is weight, wool and frost, and the feeling that the palace has pulled itself inward like a hand closing. The tourists who come in winter are the serious ones, the ones who came for the palace and not for the weather, which means they tend to look at it rather than in front of it, and I appreciate them for that, even though I would never say so. Summer is theater. The crowds double. The heat off the pavement carries a completely different smell library. Sunscreen in quantities that make my nose file constant complaint. Ice cream at melting point. The sweat of 100 nationalities generating a wall of competing biology. The light in the evening goes golden, and the whole scene looks like someone turned the saturation up on a postcard, and the tourists feel this and become louder and more present and more themselves. My nose was busier in summer. It had more to file, but through all of it, through the sunscreen and the melting ice cream and the sour heat and the competing perfumes, the warm thread was still findable. Once you know a smell, you do not lose it in a crowd. You find it faster. It was June, a Monday, I think, though the summer days have a way of blurring together into one long, bright composite, when I understood something about the smell that I hadn't understood before. Not a new smell, not a new encounter, a new understanding of the one I already had. I'd been on the inner post for the afternoon. The crowd outside was the summer crowd, generous and loud. Inside the gate, the air is different, older, slower, carrying the stone-cold exhalation of architecture that has been here long enough to have stopped being architecture and become something closer to geology. Holloway came by. Not inspection. He didn't walk with the inspection gate. He walked with the other one, the gate that means he's going somewhere near you and has something to say, but he'll say it at his own pace. He stopped at my post. He looked at the inner courtyard. "What do you make of it now?" he said. "Sir," the thing Davies mentioned. The nose. I thought about how to answer that in a way that wasn't embarrassing. I've learned, this post teaches you this, that the best answers are the ones that don't try to sound like answers. "I think it's not about royalty," I said. "Not specifically." He looked at me sideways. "Just slightly. The Holloway version of turning fully to face you." "Go on," he said. "It's about continuity," I said. "It's what continuity smells like. When something has been maintained consistently for a long time, without interruption." He was quiet for a while. "Things that are interrupted lose it," I said. "You can tell. The smell changes. Or it's absent. Or there's something trying to replace it that isn't quite right, like a copy of something rather than the thing." Another silence. Longer. "My grandfather said almost exactly that," Holloway said. "He stood this post 31 years. He said it very evenly, as if it were weather data. Then he walked away. I thought about it for weeks after. What he'd said, what I'd said, really, but what his grandfather had said before me, which meant it was a thing this post teaches reliably to whoever pays enough attention. Continuity has a smell, and interruption, rupture, displacement, the thing that has been cut from its history and is floating loose, that has a smell too. I had been learning one. I had been practicing the other without knowing it was a separate subject. The moment I need to tell you about, the real one, the one that cost me something, happened in late June. I had been on rotation nearly 14 months. I knew my post the way my grandmother knew her kitchen, not by thinking about it, but by the body's accumulated memory of it, every stone, every variation in the acoustics when the wind came from the east rather than the west. It was late afternoon, the gold light hour. The tourists were at their most beautiful. Actually, people in good light always are, the way discomfort softens them, the way the end of a long day of sightseeing makes people quieter and more real than they are at the start of it. I was on the inner post, and I caught it. The warm smell, the cedar and beeswax inheritance smell, the full version of it, not the trace from a passing car, but the proximate version, the nearby version, the same room version. I filed it without reaction, the way I'd been trained. Stood my post, eyes on the middle distance. The footsteps that followed the smell were unhurried. They had the particular quality of footsteps that have never had to negotiate their own pace with anyone. The figure came into my peripheral field, and I did not look. I held position, and I heard the footsteps slow, and I heard a voice. And here's where I'm going to be imprecise, because some things I will not reproduce. A voice that said something short and rather quiet that was, I understood after a half-second of processing, addressed to me. The figure had stopped and said something to me. I will tell you what happened in my body, which is the only honest way to tell it. My heart did something undignified. I will admit that freely. There was a half-second in which my entire practiced architecture, the stillness, the middle distance, the 2-hour equilibrium, wobbled the way a gyroscope wobbles when you apply a lateral force. Still spinning, but visibly affected. Then it steadied. The question the voice had asked was simple, logistical, about direction, a slight miscommunication about an internal entrance, the kind of thing that happens in large buildings to anyone, regardless of whether they have been managing large buildings for a very long time. It was practical. It required an answer. I gave the answer. Eyes front, hand at my sides, voice from the back of the throat, the way Holloway had taught us, not projected, not hushed, simply present. I felt the pause that followed. Then a brief word, a single syllable that carried something I cannot fully parse, something between acknowledgement and amusement, and that was all, and the unhurried footsteps resumed, and the warm smell held in the air for a moment the way a note holds after the instrument has stopped, and then it too moved on. I have spent a considerable amount of time since then, asking myself what I felt in that moment. This is the soldier's question, not the romantic question, not the civilian question, but the specific professional question that this post generates in the men who stand it long enough. What I felt was something I can only describe as the sensation of a thing being confirmed, not the excitement of a meeting, not awe, not starstruck paralysis. I've seen men get starstruck on this post, and it is always the new ones, always the first year and it passes. Not that. Something quieter. Something like the moment when you've been navigating a place in the dark for months, and someone briefly lights a lamp, not to show you something new, but to confirm that the architecture you'd been feeling your way through is exactly the shape you thought it was. I had been learning this post through my nose for 14 months. And for 1/2 second, the thing I'd been learning by smell was present, and present tense, 45 degrees to my right. Close enough that the warm cedar beeswax inheritance smell wasn't a trace or a thread, but a full living fact. And my nose, which I had built in the cold and the gray and the long-standing still mornings of that year, had already known. Had known before my eyes confirmed, before my ears confirmed, before any system that processes information consciously had been consulted. The body knew, and the body, it turned out, had been right. I told Davies about it at the end of the shift. He listened. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you move?" "No." He nodded. Not impressed. That was too warm a word for Davies. But satisfied, in the way a man is satisfied when a piece of machinery performs correctly under load. "Good," he said. That was all. That was exactly the right response. I want you to understand that. In a different conversation, in a different context, with a different person, that good would have been insufficient. Here, it was everything. It was the whole evaluation, compressed to a syllable, the way this post compresses everything to its minimum necessary unit. You learn that here too. Economy. The word that contains the whole sentence. The smell that contains the whole person. The stillness that contains the whole response. Good. I'm off rotation now. Different post, different city, different set of things the body learns without being asked. But I have kept the nose. You keep what you build with attention and time. That's the only permanence that's available to any of us. Some mornings, not always, not even often, but sometimes I'll catch a thread of something warm and cedar-edged in the air of some ordinary place, a train station or a high street or a hotel lobby, and my body will do the thing it learned on that stone post. Will go quiet, will go alert, will sort and file and stand at attention from the inside, even when no external stillness is required. And I'll look for the source. I'm never certain what I find. The world is not a parade of certainties, but I have never once smelled it from something ordinary. The thing that smells of long maintenance, of unbroken continuity, of the specific atmosphere produced by a life that has never for a single generation been treated as expendable. That smell does not come from ordinary things. That smell is what you get when a thing has been worth keeping for long enough that it starts to smell like it knows. My grandmother, if she were alive, would ask me exactly one question about all of this. She would lean across her kitchen table with her tea, getting cold beside her the way it always did, because she made tea as an act of sociability, and not because she intended to drink it. And she would look at me the way she looked at everything I brought her, with the whole attention of someone who has decided the person in front of her is worth her whole attention, which is a thing I understand better now than I did at 22. And she would say, "So what did it smell like?" And I would try to tell her. And I would run out of words in the same place I always do, somewhere between the cedar and the thing under it. And she would watch me run out of words, and she would nod slowly with that look she had, the one that means I already know what you can't say, because she had her own version of this. Everyone who has loved something long enough has their own version of this. The smell of a thing that has persisted. The smell of a thing that was kept. This is the whole story, or it's the part of it that can be told. The rest lives in the body. That's where the real things always live.